The first sermon, Turning the Wheel of Dharma. The Buddha's first teaching of the middle way and the Four Noble Truths. According to the tradition, after Brahma Sahampati asked the Buddha to teach the Dharma for the sake of the world, the Buddha no longer remained only in silence. The Dharma he had realized beneath the Bodhi tree was deep, peaceful, subtle, and difficult to understand. But he had seen that there were beings, with only a little dust in their eyes, beings who were suffering, searching, and ready to hear the path, if it was taught with wisdom and compassion. So the Buddha turned his heart toward the world, and began the first step of sharing what he had realized. That first step led him to the 5 ascetics, who had once practiced with him during the long years of austerity. According to the tradition, the Buddha first thought of the teachers, from whom he had learned before his awakening, but they had already passed away. Then he remembered the 5 ascetics. They had lived with him during the time when he practiced severe self-denial. And they had believed that the harshest discipline of the body would lead to liberation. But when Siddhartha accepted nourishment from Sujata, and left the path of extreme fasting, they thought he had abandoned the holy life. They turned away from him and left, believing that he had given up the search for awakening. Yet the Buddha did not hold anger toward them. He did not close his heart because they had misunderstood him. He knew that they had practiced with sincerity, and he knew that their desire for truth had been strong. So he quietly walked toward Deer Park at Sarnath, where the 5 ascetics were staying. The road to Deer Park was not only a road across the land. It was the path from silence into teaching. It was the path from one person's awakening toward the hearts of others. The light that had arisen beneath the Bodhi tree was now beginning to move outward, not as pride, not as argument, and not as force, but as compassion. When the 5 ascetics saw the Buddha coming from a distance, they did not plan to welcome him warmly. In their minds, he was the one who had left the severe path. They thought he had chosen comfort instead of discipline. They thought he had turned away from the struggle that they still believed was necessary. But as the Buddha came closer, something in his presence was different. His face was calm, his steps were steady, his eyes carried a peace that had not been there before. It was not the pride of a teacher trying to impress others. It was not the hard confidence of someone who wanted to win an argument. It was the quiet strength of one who had seen deeply, let go completely, and found peace beyond fear and craving. The 5 ascetics felt this before they fully understood it. Their resistance softened. Their hearts began to listen even before the teaching began. In that quiet place at Deer Park, the Buddha gave his first sermon, and the Wheel of Dharma began to turn. The first teaching was about leaving behind the 2 extremes. One extreme was the life of being lost in sense pleasure, always chasing comfort, taste, beauty, praise, and pleasant feelings. This path makes the mind soft in the wrong way, because it becomes dependent on what is changing and cannot bring lasting freedom. The other extreme was the path of self-torment, where the body is punished and the mind is tightened through pain, as if suffering itself could purify the heart. This path may look strong from the outside, but it can also become another form of attachment, another way of clinging to the idea of being holy or powerful. The Buddha knew both extremes through his own life. He had lived in the palace, surrounded by comfort and pleasure, and he had also spent years in severe austerity, bringing his body close to death. Because he had walked both roads, he could see clearly that neither one led to complete awakening. Pleasure could cover suffering for a while, but it could not end the root of suffering. Pain could show determination, but pain alone could not reveal the truth. Between these 2 extremes, the Buddha taught the middle way. The middle way was not a weak compromise. It was not a careless choice to stand somewhere in the middle because choosing was difficult. It was a clear and wise path that did not follow craving and did not worship pain. It was a way of living that cared for the body without becoming a slave to desire, trained the mind without hatred toward oneself, and looked at suffering without running from it or making it larger than it was. The middle way was the path that led to clear seeing, inner peace, wisdom, and liberation. After teaching the middle way, the Buddha began to explain the 4 noble truths. The first truth was the truth of suffering. The Buddha did not say this to make life seem dark or hopeless. He pointed to suffering because it was already present in life, and because true healing begins when we are willing to see what is really there. Birth, aging, illness, death, separation from what we love, meeting what we do not want, and not receiving what we long for can all bring suffering. Even when life gives us pleasant things, the heart can still tremble because those things are changing. The Buddha showed that suffering is not only found in great pain. It can also be hidden in attachment, fear, longing, and the quiet wish that changing things will stay the same. The second truth was the origin of suffering. Suffering does not appear without causes. It grows from craving, clinging, and ignorance. The mind reaches toward pleasant things and wants them to continue. The mind pushes away painful things and wants them to disappear. The mind holds tightly to people, feelings, ideas, memories, and even to the image of itself. Because everything changes, this clinging brings fear, disappointment, sorrow, and restlessness. The Buddha did not teach this to blame anyone. He taught it so that people could begin to see the chain that binds the heart. When the cause of suffering is seen clearly, freedom becomes possible. The third truth was the ending of suffering. This was the quiet hope at the heart of the teaching. Suffering is not something that must continue forever. If suffering has a cause, then when that cause is understood and released, suffering can come to an end. When craving becomes quiet, when clinging loses its strength, and when ignorance begins to clear, the heart is no longer bound in the same way. The ending of suffering is not merely a place far away. It begins wherever the heart stops grasping and begins to see things as they are. It is the peace of not being ruled by craving. It is the freedom of not being shaken by every change. It is the coolness of a mind that no longer burns with endless wanting. The fourth truth was the path that leads to the ending of suffering. The Buddha did not only say that suffering exists, and he did not only explain its cause. He also taught a way to walk. This path was the Noble Eightfold Path. It included right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. This path was not something to believe in only with words. It was something to live, step by step, in the way one sees, thinks, speaks, acts, works, practices, remembers, and rests the mind. Through this path, the Dharma became practical. Awakening was not only a distant mystery beneath the Bodhi tree. It could begin in ordinary life, in one honest look, one careful word, one kind action, one moment of mindfulness, and one breath taken with awareness. The first sermon at Deer Park was therefore not only the beginning of a teaching. It was the first movement of a wheel that would continue to turn through countless lives. The silence after awakening became words. The peace of one awakened heart became a path for many. The Dharma that had been seen beneath the Bodhi tree was now offered to those who were ready to listen. The 5 ascetics heard the teaching in stillness. They had once believed that harsh discipline alone was the way. Now they heard of a path that did not fall into pleasure or pain, indulgence or self-hatred, softness or violence toward oneself. They heard that suffering could be understood. They heard that suffering had a cause. They heard that suffering could end. They heard that there was a path leading to that end. In that moment, the Dharma wheel began to turn. It did not turn with noise. It did not turn with force. It turned quietly, like morning light spreading through Deer Park. It turned through words of balance, wisdom, compassion, and release. And once it began to turn, the path of the Buddha was no longer hidden in silence. It had entered the world. This story also speaks to our own lives. We may not live in a palace, and we may not practice severe austerity in a forest, but we still know the two extremes in our own way. Sometimes we chase comfort because we do not want to feel pain. Sometimes we push ourselves too harshly because we believe we are not enough unless we suffer. Sometimes we become lost in pleasure. Sometimes we become lost in self-criticism. Sometimes we avoid life. Sometimes we punish ourselves for being human. The middle way gently asks us to stop swinging between these extremes. It asks us to care for ourselves without becoming careless. It asks us to practice sincerely without becoming cruel. It asks us to look at suffering honestly, but not to turn suffering into our identity. It asks us to live with balance, clarity, and compassion. The 4 Noble Truths also invite us to look at our lives with courage. There is suffering. There are causes of suffering. There can be an end to suffering. And there is a path we can walk. Even if we cannot walk the whole path in one day, we can take one step. We can notice one craving. We can release one harsh thought. We can speak one kind word. We can pause before acting from anger. We can breathe and remember that not everything has to be held so tightly. The first turning of the Dharma wheel reminds us that awakening is not only a great moment from long ago. It is also a quiet possibility in this very life. Every time we move away from extremes, every time we see suffering more clearly, every time we loosen the grip of craving, and every time we choose wisdom over confusion, a small turning of the Dharma wheel happens within us. May we remember the middle way when we are pulled too far by desire or by self-punishment. May we look at suffering without fear and without hatred. May we slowly understand its causes, and may we trust that peace becomes possible when clinging begins to soften. And may we walk the path with patience, one breath, one word, and one step at a time. If this story remained quietly in your heart, please subscribe and like to join me. In the next story, we will hear about Khandana's understanding. After listening to the Buddha's first sermon, the eye of Dharma opens in the heart of the first disciple. I will share that quiet moment of understanding in the next story.